True. Let's go to Karma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Chimpy drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.
Sent you guys a note when I came to visit, and I said to you that, of course, one of the things that is burning right now is every African country is looking to become developed, right? Because we are the only continent that is labeled as underdeveloped countries, and we've accepted it, and we know why, and we've been trying, whether you're a Ghanaian or Nigerian, also we're all trying, right? And then I said, well, the effort is useless because no black country would ever develop. Let me explain what I mean by black countries, meaning the 54 that is on the continent, the 13 black countries in the Caribbean, the black communities in the United States, in UK, or wherever you are never, ever going to
develop. Can you also explain what you mean by develop, like in terms of economics or technology or?
A very good question. I was going to throw that to you because all I keep hearing when you turn on to Facebook or Instagram and it's Ghanaians or Nigerians or Sierra Leone's, our country must develop. Tinubu is a bad man today because he is not moving Nigeria to where it must go. From the 60s, all you've been talking about is we accepted the label in the 70s as underdeveloped countries. We did. There's no debate about that. We use it in our IMF applications. We are third world underdeveloped countries. So that's what I mean. So you have to tell me what you mean when you said I'm crazy by saying you won't develop. It means you understood what I meant.
Yes. I feel like the African countries, well, for me, I just went home to Ghana. Mm-hmm. I haven't been home in a while. So seeing the country now versus like the 3 years ago when I was there, I see a lot of differences. I see evolution. I just saw like this morning, I know this is kind of off topic, but I saw like Burkina Faso, they just created their first electric car, like their first local, completely original electric vehicle in that country. Mm-hmm. That would seem so like far-fetched like 5-10 years ago from an African country. Mm-hmm. So I do think that development is possible in African countries, even though it might be not even way slow. Well, it has been considerably slower than.
Before I jump ahead of you, can you name the company in Burkina Faso, a car company that was established, opened by a Burkinabe, a citizen? What is the name and which cars did this car company make first before this electric car?
I can't.
You can't. Where did you see it?
I saw it on Instagram today, actually.
I'm really disappointed. You are in college, and social media is not a place for fact-fetched news or stories. Burkina Faso has not manufactured, designed, and rolled out an electric car.
They haven't rolled it out yet, but
where is it?
They just designed.
Designed? I thought you said people are test driving the car on the streets of Burkina Faso.
I did not say that.
Oh, so where is it?
It hasn't been out yet.
No, where is it?
Etoya?
Who designed it?
Well,
you don't know. Which company?
Etoya.
What?
ITAOAI.
And it's owned by who?
I might have spelled that wrong.
It's owned by who? You don't know. It could be a foreign company that came to Burkina Faso and designed a car and said, we could manufacture from this place. That is not something you say is for a developed country. That's not development.
But you also, I mean, it's a sign.
We don't know. We cannot use that as an example of what you're talking. I haven't seen it. I need to see it and say that do you know how long it took Tesla to roll out one car, even the design to be complete and be a prototype? So no, it's not true.
On to Burkina Faso now. There's an interesting story of success from the auto sector there. Specifically, the release of a new electric vehicle produced by a local manufacturer is being hailed as an interesting move for a country that's been more synonymous with subsistence agriculture, conflict and political unrest, especially of late. Now, while much of the country will not be able to afford these units outright, experts say it could lead to an economic upturn amid rising demand for electric vehicles in other African markets. Here's Ian Kinyua with the details.
Burkina Faso imports an average of 60,000 cars a year. Like many other African countries, it is a major consumer of second-hand units. But in recent weeks, vehicles of a different kind have been circulating in the capital of Ouagadougou. These are electric vehicles produced by local manufacturer Etoa. According to the firm, their model boasts impressive features with a range of 330 kilometers on a single charge that can be achieved in just 30 minutes. Despite combustion-powered vehicles dominating the market, many consumers are making the switch.
Given
the explanations I've had about electric and solar vehicles, in terms of savings, we get 4,000 francs a week. Its maintenance is less expensive. You don't need to pay for oil filters, and you don't need to change the oil.
Nearly 90% of vehicles in Burkina Faso are second-hand. Such a development might be unwelcome for dealers in this sector, but they believe they can easily adapt.
We are not afraid for our market with the arrival of the vehicle. It will add value to our market. Fuel-powered vehicles are still manufactured in countries like Germany, Japan, and the United States. If these countries were to enter fully into the manufacture of electric vehicles, we believe that we will also have used electric vehicles for sale.
Industry players believe EVs have a huge potential in Burkina Faso.
Burkinabe used to buy second-hand cars because they had no choice, because the price of new cars was out of our reach. Second-hand vehicles have problems, they have been involved in accidents, and they don't meet standards. The arrival of new electric cars has come at a good time, and the people of Burkina Faso will understand why they need to buy a new vehicle. Over the last 3 to 4 years, I've repaired 10 hybrid cars. The owners of these vehicles are now interested in electric vehicles.
But the price factor will have an impact on the future of these vehicles in the country. While there is a clear interest in electric vehicles, users say the cost is still very high.
If it's possible to review the prices, it will be a great relief for us. We haven't seen a vehicle that costs less than 5 million.
However, demand for electric vehicles continues to grow across West Africa and the continent in general, presenting major opportunities for the Itoa EV. Research firm Modo Intelligence says Africa's electric vehicle market was valued at roughly 12 billion in 2021, but is projected to go beyond 21 billion in the next 2 years. In the case of Burkina Faso, the car manufacturer stated that the country has proven that innovation is not the preserve of great powers, but that it can also germinate, grow, and radiate from the heart of Sahel in Africa. Ian Kinyo, CGTN.
I want to talk about just what Frank Zanu proposed in his assertion that no black nation will ever develop. And he used very restrictive parameters to argue for this point, being that he believed that development requires a shared ethnicity, a shared language, and a shared history, and that it's impossible for any black nation to develop because, as he put it, like WASP, which is White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, there's no African nation that has a unified front with respect to these categories. Now, I think that's definitively false, especially if you were to look at the fact that many of the Western states that have been developing for the past 2 centuries have been multi-ethnic, whether you're dealing with the enslavement of Africans or recent immigrants from South Asia. In numerous cases, these nations have had multi-ethnic populations even prior to the Industrial Revolution, right? They had multiple ethnicities, the Saracens, the Moors, etc., right? And in the African context, there are nations like Somalia, nations like Ethiopia, nations where the majority of the population is one ethnicity, and they have one language, and even one religion. Christianity in the case of Ethiopia for the Amhara people, predominantly. Islam for the case of Somalia, in the Somalis. So there are numerous African nations, that you could think of. Another example is Mali. Mali, which is a Sahelian population, predominantly Islamic. All of the Sahelian populations, predominantly Islamic, right? And again, they would identify themselves as black, especially if we look at, some of the onomastic evidence compiled by scholars like Obadeli Cambone. But what I find interesting about Frank Zanu is the fact that he seems to be looking for a way to curry favor with imperialism, because a lot of the positions that he had, or that he has, that he espouses, would be similar to African nationalists in the sense of disregarding assimilationism and wanting, more integration, more positive integration of the different productive forces within African societies to bring about that which he calls development. But he doesn't seem to want to promote that. It seems to me that he is a stew pigeon for the Western imperialist powers that be. But regardless, when we analyze just some of the work of some of our excellent scholars like Dr. Leonard Jeffries, he actually spoke about how traditional African economic structures, or the African mode of production, contributed to the development of modern states on the continent. particularly in his 1972 dissertation, The Subnational Politics of the Ivory Coast Republic. In this dissertation, he argues how traditional African economies contributed to Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire's development in complex and often indirect and dual-edged ways. Its role was less about providing a direct blueprint for modern growth and more about providing a malleable foundation and labor system that, at that time, colonial and post-colonial regimes harnessed, transformed, and exploited to their benefit. So here are some key central contributions from the text. You have the foundation of a cash crop economy. And this is a cash crop political culture. What did it consist of? There was pre-existing agricultural technology. Traditional societies were already skilled subsistence farming. The colonial authorities and later modernizing state built upon this pre-existing agricultural technical knowledge to introduce and expand cash crops like cocoa, coffee, and palm oil. So the traditional, AMP, right? And they had a domestic economy in rural regions, according to the analysis of Cheikh Anta Diop. This agricultural technology was used, right, in the growing state, right? So you had Westerners coming in and using this pre-existing system to advance. They also utilized their land tenure system. The traditional system of communal land ownership, or land held in a trust, right, by the different community rulers and ancestors, facilitated the allocation of land for cash crop plantations. Chiefs as custodians could grant land use rights, which they did for themselves and other early planters. And then you had communal labor practices. The traditional obligation for communal labor, to work the chief's fields or corvée labor, as is defined by Cheikh Anta Diop, was directly co-opted by the colonial administration. It was transformed into the system of forced labor for building infrastructure, railroads and roads, and for working on the chambre des commandants, or the administrator's demonstration fields. So again, in terms of land, similar to hip hop, blues, jazz, R&B, the stolen music genres from the descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States, you had the colonial powers using these communal labor practices and land tenure as a way of building exploitation for their regimes. The traditional African technology was part and parcel of what helped them build, agricultural economies in the budding state. So then you had creation of hybrid administrative elite, right? So you had traditional chiefs as intermediaries. The colonial system lacked the manpower to directly administer vast rural areas. They used the existing hierarchy of traditional authorities, the village and provincial chiefs, as essential intermediaries. And this led to a transformation into administrative chiefs. These chiefs were given new economic roles, tax collection, labor recruitment, and enforcing cash crop cultivation. In return, they received a rebate on taxes, prime de rendement, which became a major source of personal wealth. And in many ways, they were the first capitalist planters. Because of their privileged position, traditional chiefs were among the first Africans to establish significant cocoa and coffee plantations. They leveraged traditional labor obligations and land control to become early participants in the market economy. This created a class of wealthy, modernizing planter chiefs who formed the core of the emerging indigenous elite. So when it comes to the administrative state and the bureaucracy, there was a hybridization of the traditional system into the budding colonial system. And you had the creation of capitalist planters. Now, many on the left may take issue with this, but even according to Marxian analysis, you need the development of a productive capacity in order to bring about a revolution, to change and update the material conditions of the masses. Now, the Bolsheviks had this in the majoritarian sense. They went directly from Russian feudalism to socialism, whereas the Mensheviks and the Trotskyites kind of wanted a liberalist intermediary. And Mao went directly from Asian feudalism to socialism with his new democratic policy, the new democracy, right? Akin to the new economic policy in some ways with Lenin. The new economic policy was kind of like a capitalist structure for the war economy, where they allowed, profit-bearing farms in order to build wealth and sustenance for the war effort in Russia in the 1920s. This is an analog to what Garvey did with the UNIA cooperative auxiliaries, right? Where you had cooperative, economies, cooperate, profit-bearing institutions that were used to basically construct a race trust, for the UNIA. So you had some similarities with Ivory Coast, and this goes back to the fact that, yes, traditional African structures did contribute to the development of these states. They just were controlled in the wrong way. And this is what led to the revolutionary period on the African continent, especially during the 50s and 60s against political colonialism. So these social structures facilitated political mobilization. It was a base for the mass political organization of the people. The traditional village structure, linked through chiefs, provided the organizational network for the nationalist movement. The Syndicat Agricole Africain, or SAA, and later the PDCI built their rural branches by working through these existing hierarchies. Chiefs and large planters, often the same people, became the local agents of the party, leaders of the vanguard, if you will. And there were common grievances uniting the elite and the masses, similar to how the black elite and black masses in many ways, Madam C.J. Walker, anyone, they were united in the UNIAACL. The colonial system's exploitation of traditional economic structure, forced labor, unfair taxes, and land confiscation created shared grievances between the traditional chiefs and planters and the peasant masses. This alliance was crucial for building a broad-based nationalist movement, Garveyite-type movement against colonial rule. And this dualistic legacy shaped post-colonial development after the abolition of political colonialism. So you had the persistence of the village economy. Even amidst modernization, the traditional village and its subsistence base remained the social and economic backbone of rural society. This provided stability and absorbed shocks from the volatile cash crop market. So then you had the continuity of elite roles. After independence, the new ruling elite, many from chief planter backgrounds, faced the same problem as the colonialists: how to govern and develop the countryside. Their solution was similar: use the remaining traditional village chiefs as administrative auxiliaries to implement state policy, maintain order, and mobilize rural support. So again, when we look at, this analysis, there is a double-edged sword with this. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, the good elder, the great elder, was emphasizing the role of traditional African motor production societies, right? And he also identified what Marxists may take heed to, right? The contradictory and exploitative process. The colonial appropriation of these traditional structures for economic exploitation often weakened or destroyed many of the original ethical foundations. So chiefs would become more authoritarian and less accountable as their power now flowed from the colonial state and not community consent. The very adaptability of traditional systems and communal labor, chiefly authority, etc., made them perfect tools for coercive extraction, right, by these colonial authorities. Now, this created a dual political and economic system, a modern extractive state apparatus superimposed on a resilient but transformed revolutionary traditional society, because the peasants actually began to revolt and began to organize different rulers who took their side and wanted a better route as opposed to the colonial hegemony. And this dualism, Jeffrey argues, is a defining characteristic of Ivorian subnational politics today. Right? So again, the traditional economic structure contributed to Ivory Coast development, right? And this was essentially a substrate that was radically reshaped by the colonial context. It provided the initial agricultural base, the labor systems, the land tenure mechanisms, and the social hierarchies that were African modes of production that were co-opted to build a coercive, export-oriented colonial economy. Now, this transformed the traditional elite into a modernizing planter class and laid the organizational groundwork for both colonial control and the eventual nationalist resistance in post-colonial state building. So again, with the Ivory Coast, you have the Akan populations, right? You have other populations, the Baole populations, right, in the Ivory Coast, different, distinct groups in the northern region. And these individuals were able to unite and build a structure, a nationalist structure, right, with subnational tendencies for their nation, right? So again, this analysis of, Zanu on this issue speaks to an ignorance. It speaks to an ignorance, right, with respect to what was going on the ground. And there are many different examples, right? You have Botswana and Mauritius, who are confidently, cited as examples of development and their prudent institutional choices. And there's numerous different vast ethnicities within both of these countries. Switzerland would be a Western example. It's a Western rebuke, of this analysis. in terms of the 4 national languages that they have, right? They have a multilingual state that's been able to develop pretty successfully. You have Rwanda, they're an example of this on the African continent with their multi-ethnicity, right? You have Tanzania, confidently boasted having no tribalism, even though, they have numerous different ethnic groups, right? So you can see that really what determines development are inclusive economic and political institutions that secure property access, create a level playing field, and allow for broad participation, rather than extractive institutions that concentrate power and wealth in the hands of a narrow elite, right? Because in many cases, Westerners would look at the development of the West and they would say, oh, you need capitalism, you need exploitation in order to be able to build a vertical hierarchy. And yes, this is true, but the true development that changes the standards of living are what we laid out. And if you look at African nationalists, African-centered scholars like Walter Rodney, like Cheikh Anta Diop in The Civilization or Barbarism, where he speaks about the unified bond that Paleo-African populations have, whether it's the identify with blackness or ancient Kemet in classical Africa, whether it's the shared origin and unity of our languages, whether it's our shared plight, right, against, these different institutions, these extractive institutions and these malevolent institutions. These are things that unify us. These are things that unify us culturally and unify us with respect to development in the 21st century. So any accurate reading of African history would show you that Frank Zanu is definitively wrong on this. Even in his restrictive definition of culture and development, he is wrong. The empirical data doesn't line up with his inferences. And this is something that we should pay attention to because, again, it is false that Black nations do not have the ability to develop. If they didn't, we wouldn't have the history of the African mode of production, from classical Africa to the Wangara inter-empire, to the Galanjam states, to the Swahili coast states, right? The different examples like Bamum and Congo, etc., etc. And even onward in the revolutionary period, the development that occurred under Thomas Sankara, the development that occurred under Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Ruben Umniobe, and Felix Mumie. With respect to the UPC, the development that occurred under Kenneth Kaunda, right? Kama in Botswana, Neto in Angola, etc., etc. We have numerous examples of post-colonial revolutionary development, particularly in the independence period. So however you slice it, Zanu is false on this issue. We're going to keep tabs on a lot of his work to be able to respond to a lot of the misapprehensions. So that's all I got for y'all on this. Hope to get you on the next one. Peace.
True as gold, a comma green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kanji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Shimpe drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kanji verse.